Hi, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Attendance Bias. I am your host, Brian Weinstein. This week's guest is Clay Bird, who is the host of the We Are Everywhere Phish podcast. As you'll hear Clay explain, We Are Everywhere features Clay and a rotating lineup of his guests talking about their Phish experiences, their stories, their lives. So We Are Everywhere and Attendance Bias do share some of the same DNA in terms of our purposes and our overall picture, but actually close up, we're very different shows. Soon after Clay posted his first We Are Everywhere episode, I gave it a listen. I enjoyed it a lot, very much. So I immediately reached out to him to see if he would be down to have us guest on each other's shows. He was totally in for it, and within weeks, I was a guest on episode 4 of We Are Everywhere, and we had a really engaging, enlightening, and just plain old fun, long-form conversation about Phish. It's pretty much, if I could get paid, I would be the happiest guy in the world to do that, and it was really fun to be the guest for once. So when it was time for Clay to come on Attendance Bias, he chose Down with Disease from June 3rd, 2011 at the DTE Energy Music Center in Clarkston, Michigan, which is a venue name that you'll hear continually gave me fits when I tried to say it. I don't know why. And during a year in 2011, when very few shows and jams seemed to stand out in the long run, Clay really pulled a diamond in the rough. He opened my eyes to this really excellent version of Phish's long-running jam vehicle. So let's join Clay to talk about Detroit geography, what this Down with Disease has in common with Waves, and where to find missing ticket stubs as we discuss Phish's performance of Down with Disease from June 3rd, 2011 at the DTE Energy Music Center in Clarkston, Michigan.
Let's meet today's guest.
Clay, welcome to Attendance Bias.
Brian, thanks for having me, man. I'm excited. I've listened to a few episodes, like I said, whenever I had you on my podcast, and I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad to have you here. As you just referred to, you hosted me on your podcast, We Are Everywhere, and I had such a good time talking to you. It was so freewheeling. I'm such a control freak that I feel like I need to break down my podcast into segments, into sequences, and have a series of questions. It was good just to kind of kick back and not think too hard about Phish. You know, sometimes I get wrapped up. It's serious business. But I'm happy to have you here about We Are Everywhere and about Down with Disease from June 3rd, 2011 at the DTE Energy Music Center in Clarkston, Michigan, which is completely foreign to me. I'm assuming it's just Detroit. Am I wrong?
It's about, if there's anybody in Michigan listening right now, they're going to roast me. But off the top of my memory, it's about 30 to 40 minutes away from Detroit, which is kind of funny that I don't know the exact distance since I live here now. But yeah, it's within, a quick drive from Detroit.
And I didn't know anything about this show before you brought it up to me. I didn't know about this Down with Disease. I know very little about the summer 2011 tour. And so it was a real delight listening to this specific jam. And like I said, we'll get to it. But before we do, let's talk a little bit about your podcast called We Are Everywhere. For any fans out there, let's just start at the basics. What's the premise of it?
The basic premise of it, and you kind of touched on it earlier, it's very loose fitting. It's not as structured as some podcasts, which I love. Podcasting in general, there's so many different ways to do it. I love how you incorporate the music and you cut the different segments and stuff. I love podcasts like that. They're easier to listen to, in my opinion. But with the podcasts that I typically do, I kind of like them to be free form, kind of, not to be too corny, but like tying it into like a Phish type 2 jam. You just let the conversation go where it goes. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not. But the whole premise is just talking to different Phish fans from all over the country or all over the world even. I haven't had any international guests at this point, but I would love to have some on in the future. And just talking about what hooked them with Phish and, their first show, favorite jams, stories from the road, things like that.
What prompted you to start it? And when did you start it?
Started it this year, actually. And what prompted me is I was getting ready for Phish tour, summer tour. I had bought tickets to Deer Creek and Dick's in 2020. Those obviously got canceled. Held on to my tickets for the 2021 tour and, was getting all excited, and usually before a tour, I'll watch like Bittersweet Motel to like get in the mood. And then I save a bunch of the Surrender to the Flows, the magazines. And I was looking through those, kind of just like reliving some past tours and things like that. And I was like, why isn't this a podcast? So initially I reached out to Christy, who runs Surrender to the Flow, to see if she would be interested in doing a podcast together. That kind of fell through. It wasn't the right timing for everything to go through with that. So I just was like, I'm going to do a Phish podcast on my own. I've done podcasts before in the past, so why not do a podcast about my favorite band in the world?
What have you done before?
I also have another podcast. It's called Bird in the Beard, and it's with just me and one of my buddies. We met in Portland, and that one is really loose fitting. Like, we won't prep anything. We'll just hit record and talk, shoot the shit for an hour.
Is there like a central subject, or it's just what you guys did that week?
Yeah. It's kind of, we'll touch on that, if something like, he bought a house during one of our episodes. So we talked about like being homeowners. He's thinking about getting married soon. So we talked about that on an episode. But if there's like big, like current events, like crazy things that happen, we'll talk about that. And we just kind of, it's really like us, having a phone conversation with a friend for an hour, but we record it and put it on the internet.
For We Are Everywhere, for anyone listening, if you could recommend one episode of your podcast to kind of get them interested and understand the premise, do you have one that you would recommend as kind of like an intro?
Well, they're not episodic at all, so you can kind of jump in wherever you want. And if you're a fan of this podcast, why not listen to episode 4, where Brian is on and we talk about everything. We break down. I was listening to the episode today, actually, that you recommended with the record shop, and I'm blanking on the name of it. Prime Cuts. I was listening to that episode, and that's really cool. So if you want to jump into my podcast, and you're a fan of this one, start with episode 4 with Brian.
Attendance bias lightning round.
So Clay, it's time for the attendance bias lightning round. We've heard a bit about you as a podcaster. Let's dig into you as a fan. To start things off, let's hear where you started off. When was your first Phish show?
My first Phish show was the New Year's Eve run in Miami of 2009. It was crazy, to say the least. And as a matter of fact, I recently, about a month ago, was looking at all my old ticket stubs. I saved those because I'm a nerd. And I had the PT or the Phish ticket by mail for the last 3 nights. And they have like the artwork on them and stuff. But for the first night, for some reason, it was just like a Ticketmaster, like boring ticket, And so I got on a Facebook Phish page that does exactly that, like where you can find ticket stubs and stuff like that. I forget what it's called. And just kind of like put out the call. I was like, hey, does anybody have night 1, the 28th? I want to get these framed. And a couple people were like, oh yeah, let me check. And this one dude pulled through, sent him $20. He mailed it to me. So now I have the complete set. I'm going to get it framed for myself for Christmas.
So if the Miami run in 2009 was your first show, when was your most recent show?
Last show that I was at was the Dick's run of 2021. Originally being from Oklahoma, that's a kind of like a central spot where like all of our friends, especially after we all kind of moved away and everything, every year we always meet back up at Dick's, and it's always a blast. That sounds great.
What's your favorite song today?
With the risk of sounding cliche, I have to go with one of the song that we're discussing today later on in the episode, Down with Disease. I'm a rocker at heart. And, just Down with Disease has that punch that I'm always looking for. And Tweezer as well. It was really hard to pick between Down with Disease and Tweezer, but either one of those, I'm all in.
Aside from the version we're talking about today from 2011, What versions of Down with Disease stand out to you? What are some of your favorites?
The one that I've heard the most, or that I've listened to the most, is probably the Down with Disease off that same show with the Denver Ghost. And I feel like the Disease gets overshadowed because the Ghost is such like a focal point of the show, but the Disease is just as good.
Right. That'd be, I think, November 17th, 97, right?
Nailed it. Yep.
Yeah. I'm very familiar with that Ghost. Very familiar with that show.
Yeah.
I feel like I've bathed in it for years.
Same.
Are there any songs that you're chasing?
I mentioned earlier that I'm a rocker at heart, but I also love bluegrass. And one of the songs I've been chasing is Paul and Silas. Nothing super special about it. I just love like the fast, like chicken picking. And then also another one is Brother. I would love to see Brother for no other reason than just, I dig that song.
What's your favorite post-show snack?
Post-show snack. It's nothing good. Before the pandemic, it was anything on the lot. Like everyone else is going and finding their balloons or their party favors or, posters or whatever else. And I'm just straight hitting burritos and grilled cheese left and right, getting whatever I can. But recently this last Dick's Run, it seemed like after every show we went to a McDonald's drive-thru. And just after the weekend, if we weren't hating ourselves enough, that just was insult to injury.
What's your McDonald's order? What do you get?
Get 2 McDoubles, a large fry, and a Dr. Pepper.
Solid.
Yeah.
That's a good order, man. That's off to. And finally, what is the weirdest thing you've ever seen at a Phish show?
Taking it back to Dick's Sporting Goods Park. After I was thinking about this, I've seen him more than once, but there's this guy, and I don't want to call him a wook because I don't know him, but he has all the outer appearances of someone that would be described as a wook.
You can call him a wook. It's okay.
We know. Politically correct.
He knows.
Yeah, he knows. And every time that I saw him, he has this emotional support goat. Like he's got the vest on it and everything, and it's a goat. He's got it on a leash and everything. And the dude gets into the show with the emotional support goat, and he stays up towards the rafters and stuff. And I've never seen anything like that before. And I was like, only at a Phish show would you see an emotional support goat.
When was this show played?
So Down with Disease for Today was played on June 3rd, 2011 at the DTE Energy Music Center. The 2011 tour, or the 2011 summer tour, was split into an early summer tour that began with a now legendary stand or 3-night stand at Bethel Woods over Memorial Day weekend. And it ended in late June in Portsmouth, Virginia at the, I'm still unsure how to pronounce this, I'm guessing Entelos Pavilion.
I'm guessing. As good as mine.
Okay. And smack in the middle of this summer, before the late summer tour, was Super Bowl, the Super Bowl festival, the first festival they had at Watkins Glen. And then all of August was the late summer tour from the Gorge to Dick's. And then there was an add-on show at the very end at Essex Junction, Vermont, for a flood relief benefit for damage caused by Hurricane Irene. That's right. Yeah, off the top of my head, I think that was the last time the band has played in Vermont. And, that was a weird summer for me. I was getting married. I was preparing to get married, and my wedding that summer was July 10th. And so I convinced my then fiance, that the week before our wedding, we have to go to Super Bowl, because things are going to be so stressful. We're going to have so much going on. We just need to get away from everything. And so my main memories of the summer of 2011 in terms of Phish was Super Bowl.
That's awesome.
And that's really the key to it. Did you go?
I did not. I feel like it seems like every year I have a group of friends, like we always do, that we go see Phish with. And they would always go on these, Phish festivals, like without me. Like they went to Super Bowl, they went to Magna Ball. They thought they were going to Curveball, but they didn't.
Well, yeah.
Nobody did. But no, I've never been to a Phish festival, and I'm super bummed about it.
I didn't go to a lot in 2011, but I did go to a bunch in 2010. The fall tour and New Year's Eve run of 2010 were so strong. I have the feeling that expectations were respectively high for 2011, that people were really jazzed up after the Waiting for Columbus Halloween run, fall tour 2010, and then the Meat Stick New Year's Eve gag, which was spectacular. And I remember that 2011 was a little bit, I don't know if letdown is the right word, but it didn't live up to those same expectations. I think that the band didn't have as much new material that people would have liked. And it just feels like, I don't know, my memories of it, maybe because I wasn't at a lot of shows, it wasn't as big. It was a little more of a poof than a bang. What do you remember from 2011? Contradict me. Tell me if I'm wrong.
Yeah. So I kind of feel almost opposite, but not totally. You got to remember, they're coming off their high. Sure, they're 2 years in at this point. But I feel like every year in this 3.0 era, like 09, obviously they're still figuring everything out. 2010, kind of still figuring everything out, kind of hit a good stride, like you mentioned, towards the end. 2011, kind of, I don't want to say they have it dialed in at this point, because I feel like they didn't really get it dialed in until 13, to where we're like, okay, dudes they're back in. But yeah, 2011, I mean, there were some good highlights. I mean, obviously the Down Disease that we're discussing today is from 2011, but overall as a tour, I'm kind of with you. I don't see anybody being like, hey, yeah, 2011 summer tour was the best tour that I've ever been on.
Yeah. I mean, Steam came through. Steam was the big addition, and it ended up being that New Year's gag that year. But I don't remember, other than that, any songs that stuck around. Yeah. Where were you in the summer of 2011 that you remember about that tour? Like, what was your life like? What were you up to? What's current events in Clay's life if I met him in the summer of 2011?
2011. Okay. So I turned 21 in 2011. So probably don't have a lot of memories from 2011.
Fair enough. That's like me in 2004. It's quite blurry.
Yeah, kind of blurry, but I do remember. So I started seeing Phish in 09, like we mentioned earlier. So this is my, third year of really like hitting it, and being like, okay, summer tour is announced. Let's buy some tickets, go on a road trip and see some shows. I remember we started off at DTE in Michigan. And then we hit Cuyahoga Falls and then Cincinnati, and finished up the tour at the Dick's Run. So all in all, hit 6 shows that summer. And, I'm in college at this point. So, I'm on summer break, not taking any classes, and just, partying and seeing Phish. That was my life this summer of 2011. Kind of been my life since then as well, but settled down a little bit.
And of all the shows you've seen, all the jams that you've seen, because it's been 10 years, since this jam, give or take, mostly give or take, since this jam and this show was played, why did you end up picking this one after we talked and you had to narrow it down?
Yeah, so that was the hardest part, honestly. I went through and I was looking at all the shows that I'd been to, because after you hit, as well as like you hit a certain amount of shows that you've been to, it's kind of hard to just remember off the top of your head. So I'm looking at the app, looking at my ticket stubs, being like, oh yeah, I forgot about this show. What happened there? Re-listen. And I really wanted to go with the Simple from Deer Creek of this year, 21, because that happened night one. First time I'd seen Phish in like 2 years. And it was just so epic. It was like one of the best jams, in my opinion, of this past tour. And I really wanted to break that down because it was so recent and fresh on my brain, but I kind of wanted to challenge myself. And I landed on this show and this jam in particular, because I remember with this tour, I'm still at this point, whenever this show happened, a noob. I mean, I'm still a noob at this point, but I was even more of a noob. And I was just so blown away that it was a 6-song second set. This was my first like real gift that the band had given me.
What do you mean by that?
So we're all chasing different things. You know, we're either chasing a song, or some people go to just party and hang out and have fun. A lot of people are going to get like monster jams. And this was the first experience that I had with, you know, at this point, I'd probably seen 20 shows. And this is the first time where I was like, I got a 6-song second set. They went type 2 on like, you know, 4 out of the 6 that were played in the second set. And I was blown away. I was so happy because once these jams start, just like I'm sure a lot of people can relate, I don't want them to end. Anytime I can hear them like start to wrap up, I'm like, no, don't, like, keep going. And I just felt like that whole second set, it just kept going. And I was over the moon. I was so happy.
And sometimes you don't know what you're going for until it actually happens.
Yep.
And that's such a lovely way to phrase it, how you just did it. What is your jam? Like, what's your favorite thing to go for? Like before the lights go down and, you know, at the best shows, you don't know what you're going for. You know, you walk out feeling different than what you went in with your expectations. But if there was a show tomorrow night and I say, oh, what makes you such a big fan of Phish? What would you say? What's your favorite thing about a show?
I guess I'm a purist in this sense. Like for me, it literally is all about the music. You can strip away the lot scene. You can strip away all the party favors. You can strip away everything. And even if, and I don't want to make this comparison because it kind of sounds weird in a way, but like, even if I was like blind and couldn't see the light show, couldn't see anything, as long as I have my hearing and I can hear that, at the end of the day, I'm still seeing my favorite band, whether they give us a quote unquote shitty show or it's a monster and epic and everybody's talking about it for the next 30 years. It's all about the music for me. I can see them sober. I can see them a little twisted. I don't care. I just want that. I want that gift of not knowing what's going to happen. You can go in there and they'll play, 30 songs a set, or you go in there and you get a 6-song second set and they go type 2 all over the place and your mind's blown. For me, it's the excitement of 1, not knowing what you're going to get. And then 2, just hearing 4 of the best musicians that are alive right now, just, they don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen. It's like you're going on this ride together. And it's like my favorite thing in the world. It's amazing.
So this Down with Disease is a set 2 opener, and no surprise there. There was a guest I recently had on who runs an Instagram account called Taste of Your Creation. And he said there's like death, taxes, and Down with Disease second set openers.
Love that.
And when he said it, I was like, yep, this guy gets it. There was my first show had a Down with Disease opener for the second set. It's always the case. And it almost always leads somewhere fun. And that's the case here. It's no surprise that they opened the second set with Down with Disease, but looking at it, like I told you, I never heard this before. And I listened to it on Phish.in and it's 24 minutes, question mark, exclamation point.
Yeah. In 2011, keep in mind.
Yeah. Well, that was kind of what I was intimating, that in a year, like we both mentioned, we have a similar, if not the same view of it in retrospect, that doesn't have a lot of incredibly memorable or standout tentpole jams or shows. They weren't jamming that cohesively or memorably for the most part, but 24 minutes, second set opener, that would be notable today.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. And it's not the wildest disease by any means, but it is in its own right. It goes to some different places. And this isn't going to be a disease like if you're looking for like major peaks and major valleys and like hardcore, switches and stuff like that. But it's very easy. It's easy listening and it's great. It's great all around.
It's fine. I really disagree with you there.
Oh, okay.
I do, in a good way, in a really positive way. Because and we'll get there. We're going to break down the jam. But I think it does go in a lot of interesting and different places.
And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, this is Mike's birthday show.
It is. They played Happy Birthday at some point.
Yeah. So I remember one thing I do remember before the show, in the lot, there were a handful of people walking around and they were handing out these like little flyers, and it was like, hey, it's Mike's birthday. The second that they come out, they were trying to like orchestrate everyone in the audience to sing happy birthday to Mike. And they were like, it was super detailed. It was like the second Trey puts his strap on or something like that. It's like everybody starts singing, happy birthday. And in the recording, obviously it didn't go as planned because it's just all jumbled. It sounds like the crowd's just all talking at the same time. But you can get little hints of like happy birthday, Mike, before they start out this disease in the recording. It's pretty fun.
Once the jam begins, after the Down with Disease song proper, it's pretty buoyant. It's like a happy opening to the jam section, and nothing too noteworthy yet. My first thought when I was listening to the jam is a million Down with Diseases start this way. Like I could picture myself being there. I've been there. Not to this venue, not. Yeah. I've been to Detroit once, but I've been in that position where Down with Disease, second set, lights just went down. Great song. The song portion is over. The jam starts. And this sounded like a million other Down with Diseases.
Yeah, very standard starting out, like getting into the jam, very standard.
But soon, about 7.5 minutes, it bends a little bit. It bends just a little to maybe a minor key. I got to study up on really music theory, so I sound like I know what I'm talking about. Okay.
You nailed it. Trey starts, and I had it in my notes is at about 8:30. They hit that. Trey starts dabbling in a minor key, switching back and forth a little bit, and changes the energy and kind of spaces it out. They slow it down a little bit. Leo pops out.
I had almost the same thing. I started off at about 7.5. That's when my ears started perking up a little bit. And I wrote down that if I played this section for any fan in isolation, I guess they'd be able to think it's Down with Disease. But around 8:40, you said 8:30, right around the same point, it starts to quiet and it breaks down into this like awesome capital letters, awesome speed funk section with Paige leading the way. You're dead on. It's fabulous.
Yeah. Paige pokes his head out a little bit, and I never know what to call. That's the biggest part, like in dissecting these jams for me. Because you have like the Plinko jams, and like I've called jams like Spooky Pretty before, but I didn't know what to call that. Like the speed funk kind of thing. And I didn't get the term speed because it's kind of slower, but the way that they're playing it is kind of like a speed funk. Trey and Leo kind of back and forth a little bit, trading riffs off. But yeah, it's beautiful at that part.
Whatever it is, it's delightful.
Yeah.
That's what music is for, because we don't have the words to express
exactly.
it.
Exactly.
I was going to say a couple of minutes later at 10.5 minutes, one of the best parts about this whole jam, it's 24 minutes long. There's a lot, but yet it feels like there's a lot packed into it. It's never slow. Like it might be slow tempo wise, but it's never slow in terms of interest and changing the style from minute to minute. Because at about 10.5 minutes, it's getting dark. And I think this is what around 8 minutes, the 8.5 minute mark, this is what it was hinting at. But Trey couldn't bring himself away from Down with Disease. And now he can, like 2 minutes later.
Yeah. At that 8. Yeah. So you had 8:30. I had 8:23. They lock into that pattern. Like Trey starts the pattern. They lock into it for about a minute. They have that going. And like where they're setting, like, you're like, okay, they're setting a groove and then Trey's going to break away. But then that only goes for about like 60 to 90 seconds. And then it slows back down again. And when I say slow down, I don't mean the tempo, but like they crescendo. Or that
for those of you at home who can't see, Clay is literally moving his hands up to his forehead and then pushing it down. Yeah. Like he's trying to break the waves. He's literally pushing down like he's doing a sitting down push-up.
Yeah, I'm a very visual talker. I talk with my hands.
Yeah. And I wrote that it's edgy, uncertain, and it's led by the bass. Like Trey kind of quiets down a bit. He's not the lead anymore, which is very unusual for Down with Disease. It's usually his show.
And I love that. I love whenever they do that, whenever he'll kind of like hint at a riff and he'll be like, hey, this is kind of where I want to take it. And then either Paige or Mike will pick it up and he's like, okay, cool. And then they got it going so he can go off and do his own thing. And that's exactly what happens here. It's awesome.
And this jam keeps jumping from one idea to the next. It almost reminded me of like 95 or 96 Phish in the way that Trey just had almost like I've said this before on this podcast, like a little kid with ADD who can't, once he finds something interesting, it's interesting for about 9 seconds.
I think you nailed it.
Yeah. And if he stayed with it, he would be really successful with it, but he can't. He doesn't.
You hear that. So that was a perfect description of this jam, because it's literally like looking at my notes. It's about every minute or every minute and a half. There's a change.
Same.
Yeah.
And then it really starts to fizzle out. The positive side of that kind of jamming style is it really goes into a lot of different ideas and it entertains the listener. It really entertained me. But the bad side of it is it kind of all fizzles out before they get anywhere. And then eventually, though, around 13 minutes, it fizzles out and we're back to Trey playing something. To me, because I'm such a fan of The Who, it sounds like Sparks to me. I thought they were going into it. I knew they weren't, but I thought that they were so bad. It's so like finger picking almost and very slow and kind of moving up and down a scale.
Yeah, I didn't even think or make the connection of the Sparks, but I think you're onto something there, because all I have written down is at 13:10, Trey starts a softer melody. It's still slow, and he's just kind of like building on that pattern. I feel like he's like waiting on another member to pick it up so he can go somewhere else.
Yeah, that sounds about right to me. It matches up for sure. And eventually, I don't know if someone picks it up or they all pick it up, because around 15 minutes or 15 and a half, it's got some attitude. It's got some exploration. And I use the word heavenly to describe it. It really was. It's full band jamming. It was like everyone was on the same wavelength. And I'm so glad they didn't abandon it a minute prior. Like they're all even on this progression. And I wrote, without knowing what was coming, that they stay on it for a long time. And it's a kiss of death when I think of that. Because when I think, oh man, I hope they stick with this, like automatically it's over. Yeah.
Yeah. No, my notes are similar. I didn't use the word heavenly. I used the word sludgy. So after a little bit before the timestamp that you said, I have 14:20. They get into a sludgy type of pattern started by Trey, and then it just keeps building until where you were talking about that 15 and a half moment. It's still building, and Trey kind of drops out, and then he starts adding some like patterns over it. Those little, I don't want to call them blissy patterns, but almost like a trill, like quick notes, quick note patterns. But yeah, that moment from like the 14, 15 to maybe 16, it's so solid. I'm certain that I gave myself whiplash during that part.
And I said, even though it would be great if the jam ended here, it would still be a memorable jam. But then I looked up at the player, and there's still another 6 minutes to go.
Right. Yeah. I was thinking the same thing, and I feel like I'm going back to that moment now, seeing it live. And I just remember being like, okay, they're dropping back out of this again, but they're going to pick back up on something else, just following the general, theme of how this jam has been going. Get solid minute here, breaks down for another minute or so, solid minute here. So at that 17-minute mark where they drop out of that peak, little pocket that they were in, I was so certain that I was like, okay, they're taking another minute to kind of reset, and then they're going to go back into something else.
And they do. They go into a Love Supreme.
So I didn't catch that. I know that it's in the notes, but I didn't catch it any time that I've listened to it.
I heard it at about 19 minutes, maybe a little bit after, maybe like 1920 or so. But I kept listening for it because I saw in a lot of reviews when I did my research to prepare to speak for this interview and break down this jam. I'm like, oh, is that it? Is that it? Because they do ease back, like you've mentioned several times. They do. Like there's a lot of times where this jam has its valleys, and every time I thought, okay, they're going to get into it now, but they didn't. And you have to be very patient because it doesn't happen until about 19 minutes, and it's perfect placement.
Maybe I just need to brush up on my Coltrane. Haven't listened to that in a while. So
you know what?
Maybe that's why I missed it.
I'm glad you said that, because I did that before I started listening to this.
Okay, gotcha.
Because on Phish.in, when you look at it, they always have these little notes if there's something notable. And this jam is on the jam charts as the Phish.net jam charts. And then they have teases or guest spots, whatever it is. And when I saw the tease, it says a Love Supreme jam. And I'm like, I knew this song when I was probably 24, and I could quote it and I know exactly what it sounded like, but I don't anymore. So I had to go back and listen to it in preparation, which is why I was so on edge to hear it and
waiting for it.
Yeah, it was very satisfying.
Yeah, maybe if I do that, maybe if I go and listen to it, then re-listen to the jam, I'll hear it and be like, oh, okay, there it is.
Give it a shot, because when they do place it, it's very sedate and it's very spiritual. It's like a spiritual ending for a big time jam. And I don't always use that word because to me, sometimes it ends at like exciting, big, good, awesome. Right. It's like a very basic vocabulary sometimes I have for Phish, but but this is a very spiritual ending to a big jam, and I loved it. It had one more push of energy at the very end. It felt very organic to me.
Mm-hmm.
And these days, like you mentioned about Deer Creek from this past summer, 2021, this jam might go another 20 minutes at Deer Creek, this year or these days. But back then it was really satisfying, I would imagine. If I were there, I know I would feel that way because they were a little gun shy at this point of 3.0.
I feel like gun shy is the perfect word. I feel like, and this is just me, trying to get in their brain, but especially Trey's brain, still relatively new per se, back, touring again after the hiatus. And, I have to think like, okay, we made it 24 minutes into this, like, and we've got some solid work here. Let's get out while we're ahead, kind of know when to hold them and know when to fold them. Like, we did our job with this one. Let's get to the next one.
Yeah. And it's worth noting that the context of this show, this was less than a week after the Bethel Woods shows. And that's where they had that big breakthrough version of Waves, even two. One was during the sound check. That's kind of the more popular or more famous version. But in my opinion, unfortunately, that sound check version kind of overshadows Waves that they actually played during that run, which is also outstanding, which does kind of step out into the void. And it also is 20 something minutes, maybe even a half hour, both versions. And so I think that kind of showed them, okay, we can do that. I mean, they knew they could do it, but like, this is still in us. We could push it a little bit. And so Down with Disease, as it has been since the early to mid 90s, has been a perfect warhorse for them. Like, what can we do? Let's show it off here. And it's really a great jam here.
Yeah, I'm sure that Waves, or both of those Waves, the sound check and the actual song in the show, were a bit of a confidence booster. Not saying that, I mean, we're talking about vets of rock and roll. I mean, they have all the confidence they need, but after, the certain situations that happened that led them to the hiatus or break, you have to regain that. Like, you have to pick your momentum back up. You got to regain that confidence. And I feel like that was one of the first steps in that.
And this jam was just another step on the ladder.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it definitely was. And like, I feel like most people hate ripcords. I feel like that's a, standard, thought in the community, or just with music in general. And the way that this ended and segued into Fluffhead was flawless in my opinion. And you couldn't have done it better. And that's when you were asking earlier, like, what am I going for? That, like, sure, the jam was great, but that little section where they segue and it's just perfect. That's what gets me off. It's because we've all heard so many times where they just abandon the jam out of nowhere. And there's like, oh, we're playing Waste now. It's like, what? What just happened?
Backwards down the number line is the most common offender. It's the usual suspect.
Yeah. But so, the segue out of it, it really just put a nice little bow on it. It's perfect.
Clay Bird here to talk about Down with Disease from June 3rd, 2011 at the DTE Energy Music Center. Thank you so much for being here, for breaking down so much, actually. Phish in 2011, your background with 2009 and seeing Phish for so many years, for over 10 years now. And this Down with Disease that belongs pretty much anywhere. If you talk about the best of any given year for Phish, this has got to be among the best of 2011.
Yeah, it for sure raises its hand, especially in 2011. I would even put it, it could raise its hand in some better years of Phish, where they're playing more on point. I think it would even stand out in some of those years. But for 2011, this is one of the best jams that came out of that year.
And to wrap it all up, let's give everyone a reminder about your podcast, We Are Everywhere. Tell us again where we could find it, how to get in touch with you, and what they can expect when they do find it.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's it's another Phish-based podcast. Anyone can be on. If you're listening and you want to be on, you can shoot me an email at sttf.weareeverywhere@gmail.com. Or if you're following us on any of our socials, just shoot me a DM there. We'll get something set up. And it's basically just a podcast where I talk to different Phish fans from all around the country, all around the world. And what got you hooked, what your first show was, stories from past tours, and just all things Phish.
Clay, thanks again. It was a pleasure to have you here.
Brian, thank you. This was so much fun. I could talk about Phish forever. Thanks for having me, man.
And that's it for my interview today with Clay Bird of the We Are Everywhere podcast. It's time now to back into the attendance bias fact check.
Attendance bias fact check.
According to Google Maps, the DTE Energy Music Theater is about 40 miles from Detroit, and Clay was right, it is a 36-minute drive from one to the other. The Facebook group that Clay mentioned about trading or finding Phish tickets by mail stubs is called the Phish Stub Trading Group. I thought ticket stub in your hand would have been better, but, whatever works. Double checking, it is correct that the band's show on September 14th, 2011 at Essex Junction, Vermont was the last show to date that the band has played in their home state. Clay was also right that the show was played on Mike Gordon's 46th birthday. And in regard to Waves from Bethel Woods in 2011, the famous soundcheck version was played on May 26th, which was the day before the run actually began. The one played live in concert was played on the next night, May 27th. The soundcheck version is available on YouTube, Live Phish, and basically anywhere else you want on a soundboard version. Related to today's version of Down with Disease, the Bethel Waves also has teases of John Coltrane's Love Supreme. That's it for today's episode. I'd like to thank Clay Bird of the We Are Everywhere podcast for joining me today. I'd like to thank Phish.net for their help with the fact check and Phish.in for the recording used in today's episode. Thank you for listening, and if you enjoy Attendance Bias, please support the show by leaving a rating and a review on your favorite podcast app. You can follow Attendance Bias on social media. I'm usually most active on Instagram and Twitter. If you reach out and say hello, I'm more than happy to send you a free sticker. Thank you again so much for listening. I'll see you next week on Attendance Bias.